What's it? It takes a test. Marcheshvin, tomorrow is the Yom Haledes, the 159th birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. So I'll mention a word about the Rebbe Rashab and Tanya. I mean, all the Rabbi Tanya, the Tedeshe B'Ksav. So all the Rabbi have a special relationship with the Sefer Tanya Kedisha, and the Rebbe Rashab also does. And the Rebbe Rashab used to say, it's a davar yadua by Chassidim. I think it says also in the Sichos that you're not allowed to say Pshat in Tanya. Tanya, you have to learn the way it is. Don't say. In other words, Tanya is Tedeshe B'Ksav. It's not just a gleichwert. It's not just a slogan. It's not just a nice selling point. It's true. Tanya is Tedeshe B'Ksav, which means just like in the Chumash, there's Ein Sof. God is a Davish that wrote himself into the Chumash. And therefore you can learn and you can learn and you can learn and you can learn and you can find and you can find and you can find, and it'll all be true. Somebody once asked the Rebbe about himself. The two people wrote Hanochas of a Sikha. They were very different. And the Rebbe edited them both. And the Rebbe said, Das is Emes, und Das is Emes, und noch Sachen seien Emes. But the Shimon Padam Teira, what this one wrote is true, and this one wrote is true, and the other things can be true also, because the Teira has 70 faces, you understand? So Teira is believable. But when you're learning Tanya said the Rebbe, don't say Pshat. Not whether the Pshat is Emes, or the Pshat is not Emes, don't say a Pshat, learn. The Rabbeim say Pshat and Tanya. I have this, the newest version. You know, last time I was teaching you Tanya, I was using the Rishimis, which is this. The Rishimis is the Rebbe's notes on Tanya, which were in the journal that they revealed after Gimel Tammuz, plus all the other Sichos and Maimorim and letters that the Rebbe, they compiled. They did a very good job of compiling. This is not just the Rebbe, it's all the Rebbe. It's the newest version of Tanya that Goss is giving out. It's in they're giving it out in pamphlets, and I guess they're asking people for criticism. I told this to you once. This is based on a letter which the Rebbe wrote in Tov Shin Yud Dalet, 65 years ago. The Rebbe wrote that he's preparing Tanya Hashleima, he calls it. Tanya Hasholem, I think. That in this Tanya, there's going to be the Tanya in the middle, and around it there's going to be Madam Akemis, a Pirush Kotzer, three things. Madam Akemis, footnote sources, Pirush Kotzer, short Pirush, and Biurim from Rabbi Sein and the Siyena, Biurim from the Rabbeim. Now the Pirush Kotzer, the Rebbe made himself. The Rebbe made a Pirush Kotzer. Some people will say that the Yiddish Tanya, Shurim Sefer Tanya, was a piece of this. But they're preparing this Tanya, it's very good. I mean, the whole thing is quotes from all the Rabbeim, and every line of Tanya from all the Rabbeim. It's very, very good. And the Rebbe, of course, whatever's in the Rishimis is here also. It's the latest version of the Tanya. So the Rabbeim say Pshat and Tanya. In today's Shtickele, I was preparing, there's some beautiful thoughts from the Tzemach Tzedek that you would never think of. It's the Rabbeim say Biyurim and Tanya, but a Chassid is not allowed to say Abin and Tanya. You have to learn Tanya Poshet. In other words, Tanya is written as a sefer of Avodah. It's written of a sefer to teach people how to serve the Eibishter. And as you know, the Tanya really should be viewed as Yechidus. Tanya is a conversation between a Chassid and a Rebbe about how to serve the Eibishter. That's really what the Alter Rebbe wrote. So when you learn the Tanya, oftentimes, if you start to say Pshetalach, that means interpretations and little nuances, little details, you literally forget the point. I remember when I started learning Tanya, I was a kid. I was 13. And I remember my Melamdim, I'm sure Kavanosam Ritzuyah. But on the first word Tanya, he gave us so many different Ramazim. Tanya is Eson, Tanya this, Tanya that. By the time we was finished with the Ramazim, I had no clue what Tanya was about. When you teach anybody Tanya, especially when you teach children, you gotta get to the point. What is the Alter Rebbe? You have to get the child to hear the word Beinani and the struggle of the word Beinani. And so the Rebbe Rashab said, Pshet lach tomen nizon. Unless it's negayin avodah. The Rebbe Rashab said, if you're going to say a Pshet in Tanya, so it's going to help you serve the Eibishter better, that's a different story already. Because then, if you help us serve the Eibishter, then that's the Alter Rebbe's kavanah. Which means the Haskalah Pshat may be Emes. And the Avoid Pshat may be Sheker. But the false Avoid Pshat is closer to the truth than the true Haskalah Pshat. Because Tanya, you have to learn to understand what Alter Rebbe said the Pashtas. Anyway, this is a word, because tomorrow's the Rebbe and Shabbos. So I'm sharing a word, and it's a word was mekenim in some Hadzen. So let's begin. Rabbi said we started Perek Yud yesterday, last week. Last week we finished Perek Tes with Hashem's help, and we started Perek Yud. And we're going to do today Tzadik Gomer, okay? Which means that we're on page Yud Aleph Amud Beis. That means page 28. It's 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Ubiur ha'inyan. This is where we're holding. Now, last week there were a number of things that I shared that I want to repeat, and I mean exactly that. Repeat Ibn Chazarin. Some people who listen to my classes as critics tell me, Rabbi, you repeat yourself too much. They don't say Rabbi, they have other allusions, yeah. But I think it's the right thing to do. As a teacher, I'm not, as a teacher, as a Malamed, oftentimes in class, I'll say it to my students and I'll say it a second time. Right? One time after another, because the first time they hear it, they have to listen to it. But some of my students tell me, no, you can repeat things as many times as you want. I want to repeat 2 of the points I made last year as a stage setter to today's class. The first is, and again, we talked about this at length in Perek Aleph, that the Tanya is based on the pasuk Yikorev Elecha Adavar Miyoid Beficha Ubuvavcha Laseisek. Pasuk in Pashas Mitzavim. Yikorev Elecha, it is near to you. Hadavar, the matter, which is according to Rashi, the Teirah Shebitzav and Teirah Shebalpeh, No'oid very much, Beficha in your mouth, Buvavcha in your heart, Laseisek to do. However you translate Beficha Ubuvavcha Laseisek, but it means it's near for a person to be a balabayas over himself. When it comes to what's called in Chassidus levush, I can control my thought, I can control my speech, I can control my deed, which means I can control what I think and what I don't think, I can control what I say and what I don't say, and I can control what I do and what I don't do. And this is the expectation of a Beinin. So the Alter Rebbe has a Bashtikasha. That's Korev, that's near. But again, we always point out, it doesn't say Kal, it doesn't say easy, it says Korev. It's easy, it's near. So Alter Rebbe is going to write an entire sefer to explain Eichu Korev Miyeh. So I explained to you last week that there's a context to that person. Moshe Rabbeinu was talking. Moshe was talking to the Yidden in the 40th year. Before he says Ki Korev Elach Adavar Miyeh, he says something else. That a mitzvah zeh is asher nech mitzav chayim v'lei defleis v'lei recheka v'lei b'shamayim v'lei v'lei. Which means this. Moshe tells Yidden Hezechan Yidalach, your dependency on the Meibishter, and accordingly your obligations to him, your debt to him, is such that he can make any demand and you would have to meet it. Right? You can't tell the Eibishter you can't demand this of me. Why? Because the Eibishter creates us from nothing into something every second. That pretty much includes everything. So the Eibishter is creating us our debt to him, our achrayis, or his chayvos, obligations to him, or whatever he wants. So Moshe says to Yidden Hezechai, listen, you should know that the Eibishter is saying, Loi nefleis, loi racheka, loi b'shamayim, loi mevalim. I'm not asking you to serve Hashem on a level of the fleis. I'm not asking you to serve Hashem on a level of racheka. I'm not asking you to serve Hashem on a level of b'shamayim. And I'm not asking you to serve Hashem on a level of mevalim. That's the context. He could demand the place. He could demand the He could demand Bashamayim. He could demand Mevel Ayam. And he says, Loi, 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 loi. I'm not asking for this. I'm not asking for this. I'm asking for this. I'm not asking for this. All that I'm expecting is the opposite. So from Moshe's angle, it's a good, the segue, the Hakdama justifies the Karev Elecha. It's like Pashas Ekev, yeah. Va'ata more the Shem Elekecha Sheil Ve'imach Kim Le'yira. Moshe Rabbeinu geht verbringen. Der Eibishter Mund von Gott nicht, mehr nicht für Yira Shamayim. All I'm asking of you is to fear him. And of course the deal is, you don't have to love him, you have to just fear him. Fragting Gemara. Auto Yira Milsa Zutra Sehi. To fear the Eibishter is a small thing. And for the Gemara in the Gabe Moshe, Milsa Zutra Sehi. For Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a Zutra Sehi. For the Alter Rebbe, so what kind of tenets is that? And the Rebbe is Perek Aleph, Perek Beis. It's the only place in Tanya where you have this. The answer is that there's a nitzitz of Moshe. Everybody has Moshe Rabbeinu inside, and for Moshe Rabbeinu we have Das. And because of Moshe Rabbeinu we have Das, it becomes Milsel Zutris for every year to have Yiras Hashem, which is powerful, which is serious, yeah? But the same thing with the whole Tanya. Meisha Rabbeinu says, what's the logic? The Eibishter could have made it much harder. He could have made it Nifleis, he could have made it Techek, he could have made it Mashmaim. He would be like, yeah, you didn't do this. Loi. So from Moshe's angle, not a big deal. And one dish to feel, it doesn't demand too much. I'm reminding myself of a story that the first Yud Aleph Nissen, the Rebbe became a Rebbe Yud Shvat, yeah, officially, Tavshin Yud Aleph. That Yud Aleph Nissen, Label Gron was a Bocher. Rabbi, Label Gron was a Bocher. And he worked for the Rebbe, he was the Rebbe's Mesharis, he was still a Bocher at the time. And the Rebbe told him to go into the Zal, to the Beis HaMedrash, in the morning of Yud Aleph Nissen, and to tell the Bocher that the Rebbe is going to the oil for his Yom HaLedes. And then he said, was auch sagen, als die, was seinen Gerät übergeben sich mit Anemes, sollen anschreiben Shmom v'Shemim. The Rebbe said to Rabbi Groner, tell the boys, those who are prepared to dedicate themselves to the Rebbe in earnestness, should put on the names and their mother's names. I think the Rebbe said, "We'll wissen, I'm a machnish kein joke." It's not a joke. So the Rebbe said, "We werden nicht monnen gedeles in the Torah." I'm not going to ask you to do impossible things. Aber wir sollen wissen, dass es nicht kein joke. That's the Lashon. I'm not going to ask you to do, bashamayim, the flays, but it's not a joke. And that's the sequence of these psukim. Lay the flays, lay the chayka, lay bashmayim. Why am I bringing this up now? Because in the flays, the chayka, bashmayim, me'evel yam is madregas of tzaddikim. Poshe kipshut. There are different levels of tzaddik. There's a madrega of tzaddik who serves Hashem me'evel yam. There's a higher madrega of tzaddik who serves Hashem bashamayim, a higher madrega of tzaddik still who serves Hashem on the level of the chayka, and a higher madrega of tzaddik who serves the flays. So the Eibishter says, Moshe Rabbeinu says to the to the average Yid, Beinani, who's not a tzaddik, from you he's not demanding like the flesh, like the chayk, all the time. You understand? Just cut it. That's the pshat. In other words, a tzaddik is somebody who has killed his Yetzer Hara. A tzaddik v'rali is someone who has killed the Yetzer Hara on one level, or on two levels, or on three levels, or on four levels. If a tzaddik v'rali kills his Yetzer Hara on all the levels, he's automatically a tzaddik gomer. You have the word, very uncharacteristic in Tanya, memela. If you kill the Yetzer Hara on all levels, memela, you're a tzaddik gomer. And the difference between one tzaddik and another tzaddik is midvasa b'sheftitzach, what he's busy with. One tzaddik is busy with me'evel hayah. He's trying to take the klip out of his midas. Another tzaddik has finished that avoid and he's busy with bashamayim. He's trying to take the klip out of his mayach. These are very spiritual things, very sensitive things. These are not things we can even understand because we're not tzaddikim. We have basic Yetzer Haras with basic mistakes, basic falling and standing up and falling and standing up and so forth. And then there's a tzaddik who's being mavaded the klipa from his kecha mestidas nefesh. That's called rachek. Then you have a tzaddik who's mavaded his klipa from his kecha tainig, which is called nefleis. So all of these madregas are real. The nefleis of the racheka and bashma, they're real for somebody. And the Beinit is being told, now, Perek Yud happens to be the Perek in Tanya dedicated to Tzaddik. So this is how we understand. What's the difference between one Tzaddik and another? What his bitter is. Just like the Beinani is fighting with Yetzer Hara. He shouldn't do an Aveda. A Tzaddik is fighting with Yetzer Hara. He's not, an Aveda he cannot do. He has no Sheikhs Avedas. But that there should be a Chesreinis in his Aveda of Tzaddik. On one of those levels, this is possible, and this is his purging, this is his biru, this is his avodah, to cleanse it, to burn it out. That should be b'tachas hashlemus. I'm going to give you a dugma. One of the things which is brought in Chassidus is that sometimes from Avas Hashem comes kanos. But kanos which is wrong, the Zohar says, and this is hard to understand, but it's brought in Chassidus. The Zohar says, Reisha de Esav v'atfui de Yitzchak. The head of Esav sits at the feet of Yitzchak Avinu. It's a Zohar. Now it's also a medrash, but Chassidus explains the Zohar. There's a Maimon from the Friedrich Rebbe, which is based on a Maimon in Hechsheim Beis, where he talks about this, that a person is a very passionate person in terms of his Yiras Hashem. Very passionate to Yiras Hashem. So when it comes to somebody else, so there's a spillover. His passion spilled to the other person. that he's very critical, he has no patience, and so on. Yeah? And the Rebbe Rayatz, the Rebbe Rashab goes through 3 or 4 levels, and the lowest level is Poshet, the person who gets pleasure from hurting other people. It starts off, but I love the Eibishter so much, so I'm intolerant of somebody who has kach v'kach chesaron. That's tzaddik v'ralei. He loves the Eibishter so much, but the midah is not mevurin. For haraya, his midah, when it comes to the next guy, it burns him. If you would be mavarid, the midah completely, then his avas Hashem wouldn't burn the next person because there would be no ra'ah and there would be no unika. If the avas Hashem, it's madrigas tzaddik, but because to that level of the neshama, there's still it has the secondary effect, and a tzaddik is busy being mavader the klipa in the madrega of the midas. A different tzaddik has finished that cast; he's done. So he goes to the next madrega. And my sense is, my understanding is, that just like going from Beinoni to tzaddik is not a choice. You can't go to it. Al Rebbe says in Tanya, we're going to have it later. Going from Beinoni to tzaddik is not up to you. The Eibush gives you a certain neshama and certain devushim, and you come from a certain world. So if you're made to be a Beinoni, basically you'll be kol yom of baveidazu. By tzaddik, I think by tzaddik it's the same way. It's not like a tzaddik she'eni gom says, okay, I'm going to go from this madrega. Whatever the Eibush made you to be, this is your avodah. And whether you have an opportunity, just like the question of going from Beinoni to tzaddik is up to Hashem and not up to the person, the question of going from one level of tzaddik to a different level of tzaddik, I think, I don't know, because it doesn't say in Tanya, is also up to the Eibishter. For a person to be a tzaddik gomer, the Eibishter gave them the koiches for it, and they can raise themselves to this madreg.
No, I have a question. So for sure, you're saying that the person, the example that you gave, that his love for Hashem spills over into his anos and affects somebody else. If it affects somebody else, then it's out of the realm of Aveda. It's an Aveda. How do you differentiate between saying that something was done,
In Kok Trachte Chametz, in my head I have a story. And I dafka didn't want to tell the story. But I'll tell the story. I didn't want to tell the story because I didn't want to bring up a chesaron in such a person. But this is a story that Chassidim tell. And you tell me if it's an Aveda. You tell me. You'll hear the story, you'll understand yourself. It says in a Yeng actually, that the Alter Rebbe organizes Chassidim amongst different mashpiyim. The Alter Rebbe had great Chassidim. The Alter Rebbe had great Chassidim. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidus given. The Alter Rebbe gesagt auf sich, he owes the Eibishter a thank you for his Chassidim. So it was a normal world. It was a very deep world. It was a very high world. It was a world of a lot of avodah. But it wasn't a Meshugoyim voice. Everybody knew his place. And everybody knew what he's there for, where he's holding, and where he's going. And the Alter Rebbe organized, it says a Lashon, the Friedrich comes Abri, Matzvi v'tzadri nifla. I think it's a Lavinu Arish. Alter Rebbe was a Moedenik Mesudim. And the Chassidim who were involved in previous. The Alter Rebbe had plenty of Pasha to Yid. The Alter Rebbe had Bali Chura also. I'm talking about the Chassidim from Babs Gehalten, Chabad Chassidim. It was a whole order with Alter Rebbe. And that order had, it was a Sa'ad, support, assistance. The Alter Rebbe had Mashpiyim who were in charge of lower Mashpiyim until it came down to the Yamcha. It was a pyramid. It wasn't a Rebbe and everybody. There was a pyramid. By our Rebbe there was no such musik. By the Alter Rebbe there was such a musik. There was a pyramid. And so in Hayom Yom it mentions 2 names. The Mittel Rebbe and the Maril. The Mittel Rebbe was in charge of the Yungalite, the younger Talmidim, and the Maril, Alter Rebbe's brother, was in charge of the Mittel and the other Chassidim. But in Teila Shabbat there was Chassidim that Tzeilin. Rabbi Adam Strashele was also involved. I don't know why he's not mentioned in Hayom Yom. We can say Hashoris, aber ich best nicht in Hashoris. Rabbi Adam Strashele also was in charge. In other words, the way we hear it that Fabring is Mamashpiyim, and again, in Hayom Yom it only mentions these 2 names. The Alter Rebbe's brother and Alter Rebbe's Chor. The Middle Rebbe was younger than Rabbi Strashele. They were very close friends. They were very, very close friends. But the Middle Rebbe was considerably younger. I don't know how many years younger, but he was considerably, the Rabbi was older than him. Not a year or 2, let's say 7 or 8 years. So the Middle Rebbe was in charge of the Yungalite. The Rabbi Shalom was in charge of the Mittelalite, and the Maril was in charge of the adults, the elder of Sina. This is how, again, it does not say this in Hayem Yem, but this is the Teresh Malpeh. The story is that the Mittel Rebbe got sick. Mittel Rebbe was sick all the time. Mittel Rebbe's goof, apparently, he suffered from his with his lungs his whole life. His whole life he suffered with his lungs. He was not so healthy from birth. And he frequently got sick. I mean, and you serve the Eibush, the Mittel Rebbe serves the Eibush. It's a nest in the Neshama says, the Baal Shem Tov used to say about himself, every time he finishes davening and the Neshama stays in the Kuf, it's a nest. And the Mittel Rebbe was, the Baal Shem Tov said that about himself, the Rebbe was talk a whole sikh on the Mittel Rebbe, he was the Mittel Rebbe. So he was sick frequently. So on one of the occasions of his illness, the Alter Rebbe called in about his special. He called in about him, he said to him, hey, yes, that the Mittel Rebbe is not well. So he wants him to take the achrayas of the younger light also. That not only should he be involved with the Mittel light, but he should involve also with the younger light. So he agreed. So now he has many Avrechim and younger light. This was avoida pnimius. This was not. They didn't have to put their arms around each other and sit the whole night to convince the guy to put on film. This was pnimius. He said avoid. Your man came into them having a problem. You told him the solution, and he went and he did it. It was not more involved in that because they were real. The Mashpiyim were real, and the Mushpoyim were real. You're talking not to the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe's chsid. Anyway, so the Hemshech HaSipur is that the Rabbi Shalom was Evid Elokim. A serious Evid Elokim. And the Rabbi Shalom served Hashem with a lot of regesh, Yedua. And the Rabbi Shalom feels that his avodah is dragging. It's not the way it was. There's something about his avodah which is heavy. He's not able to carry himself and to raise himself and to inspire himself the way he did. So why didn't Alter Rebbe Tichidus? He had an open door mistan with Alter Tichidus. And Alter Rebbe told him, was er lost. Als men fühlt sich mit anderen mit Juris, fühlt man sich nur Meile eigen mit Juris. Als men fühlt sich mit anderen mit Juris, fühlt man sich eigen nur Meile mit Juris. This is it. He was in charge. He was the Rabbi Sheller was like fire, flam fire. He was a magnet. When he became a Rebbe, he was a serious competition with the Mittel Rebbe. He was mamish eish. He was fire of the kus. He was a big tzaddik. He was a very big tzaddik. He was a more than the very little kid. But his fire had this property of Nikas Achitzayin that I mentioned. So when he was involved with the Chevre who were in their middle years, they were Caleb for him. But then the Alter Rebbe gave him the younger light, and apparently he treated them the way he treated himself. And the Alter Rebbe observed that he's using too much kavura. So if the pasuk says, "Heina shamayim lazachu be'einav," if the Eibishter wants to find fault, forget about it. Since he was being overly critical of the younger light, so normally they demanded more of him to get the same Avas Hashem, the same Yiras Hashem, the same Gilead Elikinu. So I'm asking you, Rabbi Shalom didn't have it. Rabbi Shalom was in ganzen ungeflammt with a fire.
Okay, I was not thinking of those great.
No, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about tzaddikim. We're going to
I know about tzaddikim.
Yeah.
But at what point does level in Aveda become an Aveda? Maybe, I don't know, maybe my idea of an Aveda is
You're asking a practical question.
Yeah.
You're not asking about tzaddikim, you're asking about us. It's such a good question. It's really, really a very good question. You know why it's a good question? It's a good question. I'm a terach tzachana, yeah? The Rebbe pushed us. And pushed us. Pushed us. And pushed us. And pushed us. The answer to every problem was to work harder. Yeah, in the years since Gimel Tammuz, a lot of us are having a lot of rachmanis on ourselves. The problem is we're not paying attention enough to our feelings. And we're not being honest about our feelings. So we become bottled up. And so on and so forth. So there's this whole movement of people having rachmanis on themselves and saying that if you want to be a successful yid, you want to be a successful chassid, and so on and so forth. Now, a guy told me that a psychotherapist told him, I find the Lubavitcher Rebbe to be very unempathetic. Imagine, he's reading the Rebbe's letters. And he doesn't begin to understand the ahav that the Rebbe, not the Rebbe had, that the Rebbe we felt. So when you read the letter, the Yeshiribene, you come away with this impression. So now you answer the question. So where is the balance? The Rebbe pushed us. To me, it's almost like this self-absorption. It's a chassidus now. It's a chassidus of taking care of yourself. It's not how we were raised. And I say we, I don't mean raised by the mashpia, I mean raised by the Rebbe. So I'm not saying that this need for people to be sensitive to themselves has no place. But a little bit, it's a bissel too viel. It's a little bit too much. The Rachmanis itself is a bissel too viel. In terms, and the way I see it is what the Rebbe was trying to do. In Pashat Netzechel Enushi, is you push a person, they become bigger. You become bigger, they solve problems. If a person is going to have a bunch of Rachmanis on himself, he's not going to become, maybe he'll solve his problems, but he'll be less mensch. The Rebbe didn't want us to be busy with the negative. There is a point at which you have no choice. And that point is the point that you're calling an Aveda. The person pushes himself. And he pushes him so far, for example, that it comes out in Kas. Or in another Midah, that's turns directed at other people. So that's a line that a person has to appreciate. You have to know limits. But this is how I understand your question. And there's legitimacy to the question. But we're Chassidim of the Rebbe. To me, in my head, the Rebbe's whole shita was be involved in good and you won't have to deal with bad. The whole shita of Elam Hazeh is bad, you have to see how you can navigate it the best way. And we forgot the basic teaching. It's so deep and so serious that we have to be involved in good and the bad will go away by itself. And the more we go away from that principle, the more we look like everybody else. I'm responding to what you're saying, not by answering your question, but by bringing out the reality of the question, the shaila of the question. It's a legitimate question. It's a kutakash. And let's go back to tzaddik. Why? Because it's theoretical. It's always very safe. That's what men love to do. They talk about anything but what's reality. Anyway, I really did not intend on spending so much time on this. But what I just shared with you, the first point that I wanted to repeat was this, that the tzaddikim are busy with the neflesh and the recheika, the shmai me'evel hayam, but not beinim, you understand? Our Perek is talking about tzaddik. So the Rebbe says there's two kinds of tzaddik, the tzaddik she'enei gomor, and the tzaddik gomor. And of course, as we discussed last week, this is the second thing I want to repeat from last week, is that there are two terms, tzaddik she'enei gomor and tzaddik v'ra. One set of two, yeah? Tzaddik gomor and tzaddik v'toiv loy. In Nigle, each pair is totally separate. Tzaddik gomor and tzaddik she'enei gomor has to do with the level of a person's righteousness. And tzaddik v'toiv loy and tzaddik v'ra loy has to do with the person's material condition. Tzaddik v'toiv loy means that tzaddik who has a good begashmias. That's how my Malamed told to me. I could hear him saying the words. Tzaddik v'sem is good. Tzaddik v'ra loy, a tzaddik v'sem is nish good. And in case we didn't understand, he translated, this one has a health, and this one has parnasa, and this one doesn't. So tzaddik gomor and tzaddik she'enei gomor reflect his avodah ma'amid hamatzah. Tzaddik v'tevle, tzaddik v'rale reflect his mitziastik ma'amid hamatzah. But the Alter Rebbe joins them together. And he says they're both the same. Tzaddik gomor and tzaddik v'tevle, and tzaddik she'enei gomor. Oh, say forget. Tzaddik v'tevle, tzaddik gomor, tzaddik v'rale, tzaddik she'enei gomor. Why? Because he translates the words tev and ra differently. He doesn't translate the words tev and ra. A tzaddik who has a good begashmias, and a tzaddik has good beruchnias. A tzaddik v'rale means a tzaddik who still has a ra. And from the lashon for the zeif and the Pashas Mishpatim, tzaddik v'rale shara shabei kafaf v'tev. There's ra in him, but it's not like by a bein in it that it has a voice. It's kaf, it's quiet. It doesn't bother him, but it's there. If it bothers him, he's a bein in him. If it's not there, he's a tzaddik gomor, tzaddik v'tevle. If it's in him and it's not bothering him, that's the tzaddik v'ra'ala. You see, and the tzaddik v'ra'ala goes to look for the ra which isn't bothering him and proceeds to push it out. That's his avodah. That's the Yevalayama, that's the Bashamayim, that's the Nechekan, that's the Nefles. So in the Tanya, the two become connected. Tzaddik Gomer, it's tzaddik v'tevle. Or to say it backwards, tzaddik v'tevle, it's tzaddik Gomer. A tzaddik who has only good, and the ra has been transformed to good. And the Alter Rebbe uses the word memela, I'm saying it a second time. That when you remove the ra completely, automatically the ra is toy, and that's the tzaddik gomer. And then tzaddik v'ra'aloi is tzaddik who still has evil in him, but it's kafaf u'batal it doesn't bother him in his practical life. He's called a tzaddik she'ein gomer. Okay, those are the two things that I wanted to repeat from last week. It took me longer than I intended. Now, let me tell you how this works. The Alter Rebbe first discusses tzaddik gomer for a few lines. Then he moves on to tzaddik she'ein gomer for more than a few lines. Okay? And then at the end of the Perek, he revisits tzaddik gomer. That's the design of this Perek, okay? In the beginning, he talks about tzaddik gomer. Today's shtickle is tzaddik gomer. Then he moves on to tzaddik she'ein gomer. And then at the end of the Perek, he goes back to tzaddik gomer and starts speaking about what it amounts to in tzaddik gomer itself, higher and higher madrigas. Okay? So let's do a little bit reading, if we may, please. We're on page 28. That would be Yadal Amud Beis. It's 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Let's explain it in detail. Last week's class was a Shalom Aleichem. It was an opening to the Perek. And we read the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe gives an opening to the Perek. We define tzaddik. And now he breaks it up into the 2 categories of tzaddik gomer and tzaddik she'ein gomer. Tzaddik gomer, the meaning of a perfect tzaddik is that the evil in him is been eradicated, and the proof that it's been eradicated, that it's been transformed into good. Which is why the 2 terms tzaddik gomer and tzaddik v'tevle go together, even though up in Nigla. Tzaddik gomer defines as avodas Hashem, and tzaddik v'tevle defines how much money he has in his bank. But up in Chassidus, it's the same. Tzaddik v'tevle means the tzaddik who has only good. Yeah? But tzaddik v'tevle, he's called the perfect. A tzaddik only good. Who? Because he has altogether removed the garments of filth which are from evil from his person altogether. And there's a footnote from the Rebbe Rashab where the Rebbe Rashab says there's 2 parts to the klipa of the Yetzer Hara. One is called the begodim atayim, the garments that are dirty, and the other is called etzem ke'ech hamisana. Etzem ke'ech hamisana means the urge to desire things. So the Rebbe says when you separate, when you destroy the levushim atayim, when you destroy an interest in desiring bad things, so the etzem ke'ech hamisana, the power of desire, automatically becomes good. You have this in a lot of places in Chassidus, that the Yetzer Hara, let me give it to you in Yossi. Yeah, this is an eter. You have Yetzer Hara and Nefesh HaBahamis. You have Yetzer Teiv and you have Nefesh HaLakis. What's the difference? What's the difference between Yetzer and Nefesh? So in general, the difference is the word Yetzer is from the word Surah, shape, form, chitayis. And Nefesh means life. And in my modern, Yetzer means the Midas, and Nefesh means the Moich. But one of the ways that it's brought out is Yetzer means the things you desire. Nefesh means the power of desire. Yetzer means what I want. Nefesh means that I want. So the Nefesh of the kids has a Yetzer Teiv. I want this in the Lakus, this in the Lakus, this in the Lakus. And the Nefesh means the power of want. And by the Yetzer Hara, it's the same thing. So the Rebbe Rashab says in a lot of places that I learned, and I'm sure it says in the Rabbi, that the Yetzer you kill, the nefesh is transformed. The etzem ke'ech hamisaved, the animal soul's want, can be made to want good. It's draped, it's covered over with levushim that are tzoyim, that want negative things. So the animal soul's want is directed towards those levushim. And specifically, the nefesh is mislabish in the yetzer. You desire these things, your power of want is manifest in these things. But if you kill the Yetzer Hara, you totally eradicate what's called levushim atzoyim, the desire for specific negative traits. The koyach hamesava, the simple power of want, the implication is that it's transformed into good. I don't know if one would use a mela, but it becomes included kedusha. They state on bottom of the Rebbe Rashab. Okay, so there's a tzaddik gomer has completely removed the tzura of the ra, the desire for evil things. So his bad becomes good. And I guess what you're hearing here is two pratim. The first prat is getting rid of the ra, and the second prat is that the ra is mishapech l'torah. Which is it? Are you getting rid of the ra, or is the ra mishapech l'torah? So the Rebbe Rashab says what you're getting rid of is l'vush matzayim. Getting rid of what the nefesh habahamis desires. What's being transformed into good is the keach hamesaveh. The power of want in the nefesh habahamis is benign. It can want anything. So if you get rid of the l'vush matzayim, that's taking away the ra. So then the ra, nepach l'toiv, is the etzem. You follow? So I guess with this footnote, what the Rebbe Rashab is doing is explaining what you're destroying, what you're killing, and what you're transforming. You're killing the tzura, the yetzer, and you're transforming the nefesh. The hainu, this means the gamri completely. And then when you destroy the garments, the tzura, completely, so the nefesh is transformed. The hainu, this means limeis me'ed v'tenugi el ma'aseh. A person that's not a gomer is disgusted very much by pleasures of this world. And of course, in order for anybody in this life to be disgusted at pleasures of this world, you have to get rid of the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara desires pleasures of this world. Everybody has different desires, everybody has different pleasures, but everybody is affected by one part or another of Elam Hazeh, and you need to get rid of that lavush. And when you get rid of that lavush, so then the etzem atoiv can be, the etzem of nefesh habahamis can be transformed into good, and the consequence of that is going to be that instead of desiring these things, you're going to hate these things, right? Limeis me'ei, to be very disgusted, but with the pleasures of this world. Leis anig ba, to be delighted with them and through them. B'tanugins b'nei adam, and the delights of people. Lemale is taivas aguf bulvad, which is to satisfy the weakness. The word taiva means lust. But the word taiva really means schwachkeit, weakness, lack of strength of the body alone, rather than it being for Avodas Hashem. And a person has to kill that involvement so that it can be transformed into good, and that's the madrega of a tzaddik. The reason you have to get rid of them is because they're drawn and they flow. From klipa. And anything which comes from the other side, hatzadik hagama, the perfect tzaddik, hates it absolutely. Machmas geidel avasei laHashem u'gedushasei, because there's great love for the Eibishter and the Eibishter's holiness. The Rebbe struggles with this word u'gedushasei. He says, Kedusha doesn't mean the Kedusha of the Neshama, it means the Kedusha of the Eibishter. But you have a Rabbi b'tanuga with an infinite love and a love of delight. V'chiba yeseda anal, and an extra measure of love, which we discussed before. And I'm going to assume that discussed before means Pedic Tes. I'm going to assume that it means Pedic Tes. Okay? Kihem zeh, liyuma zeh. They're one opposite the other. Kediksiva, the truth in the puzzle. That evil, I hate evil absolutely. They're my enemies. David says to Abish to search me. And you'll know my heart, and you'll see that I hate it absolutely. According to the measure of one's love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the same worth is there for one's hate for klipa. V'amiyus baram, be disgusted by evil, but tachas absolutely. Ki hamiyus hu hepech al, because disgust and love are equal and opposite. Mamish shemay hasin. There's a psychological point here which is very, very powerful. That is, hate and love are equal and opposite. Sin and ava are equal and opposite. Beis kav meshkula, and in this case it's miyus and ava. Disgust and love are beis kav meshkula. They're equal and opposite. The point that Alter Rebbe is making is that you'll see it in Mitzvah next week when we talk about Tzaddik Sheni Gomer. I'm finishing Tzaddik Gomer today. That was my plan, and whatever I do, I'm going to do. Why? Because Mistam is not the gain avoida. It's Mistam not the gain avoida. In other words, I didn't measure my time well. It took me too long to get to this point. So whatever I say today, I'm going to say next week, B'li Neder, we're going to do Tzadik Sheni Gadol. The rule is that Oyav Hashem Sinner. If you love God, you hate evil. Or say Nera Oyav Hashem. If you hate evil, you love God. And they're equal in opposite. That's the definition of a Tzadik. You know, you're going to have later. In Perek Tazvov. A Beinani that's lay about it. It's possible. A Yid should be a Beinani. He's not working hard. If he's not working hard, what makes him a Beinani? So Rebbe describes it. He's a Metzunin B'tivei. He's Mechus Hageshano B'tivei. He's Masmid B'libude B'tivei. If you have the right set of personality traits, a Kalter Mensch, and the person who's not a pleasure seeker, and he's naturally diligent, a person can be perfect and not struggle with Yetzer Hara because he's half dead. If you have those three characteristics together, Mitzunin b'tivei, you're cold, you're not passionate. Mechutz hergesh hano, you don't have a geschmack in Taivis. Bemes, aber Taivis ist eine Sache. Nicht jeder eine. Zu verstehen Essen ist eine Sort Mensch. Zu verstehen Kleiden ist eine Sort Mensch. Nu, Mechutz hergesh hano, hat sich kuschen dem. And if on top of that you're masmid b'limuda b'tivei. By nature you're a masmid, but his garba samashchet. If you have those three character traits, you can be perfect and not struggle. So when I teach it to my boys, they always say, so how you know he's not a tzaddik? And the answer is because he doesn't hate evil, he doesn't love God. It's machine, mechanical. The definition of a tzaddik is Evei Hashem Sinra. He loves the Eibush and hates evil. Hates evil of the Hashem. That's the definition. There's an emotional involvement in his relationship with the Eibush. Okay? But the way it works is, you'll see it next week. If you hate evil 80%, you love the Eibush. The 80%. If you hate evil 90%, you love the Eibush. If you hate evil 100%, then you love the Eibush. And vice versa. If you love the Eibush completely, then you hate evil completely. If the Avot and the Eibush is not total, then the Sinat and not evil because they're base, kavam, shkul. So they're equal enough. So the Rebbe says, I want to substitute the word mius for the word sinner. I want to take the word sinner out. The pasuk says Evei Hashem Sinera, and I'm allowing myself to use the word mius. And the Rebbe says it's not so bad because really mius and sinner mean the same thing. Mius means to be disgusted by. Sinner means to hate. Disgusted by an aveda is the equivalent of hating an aveda, which is the equal and opposite of loving a mitzvah, loving a Kadosh Baruch. So the Rebbe says a tzaddik gomer hates evil completely because he loves Hashem completely, or backwards. A tzaddik gomer loves Hashem completely because he hates evil completely. The Lashon Apostle, Tachlis Sinas Nesim. Tachlis Sinas Nesim. David HaMelech says, I hate him so much, he can't hate more than I hate. The Alter Rebbe said about Napoleon. The Alter Rebbe said about Napoleon, Tachlis Sinas Nesim. I hate Napoleon so much, it's not shaykh to hate Napoleon more than I hate him. That's the Madrega of a tzaddik gomer. How do you achieve Tachlis Sinas Nesim? It's hard. How do you measure? Infinite hate. Infinite love. That's the criteria of tzaddik gomer. A tzaddik gomer loves the Eibush totally, and his hatred for evil is absolute. And I want to share a thought on this. Okay? And the thought is very pashut. You have in Chassidus that there's Ahavas Hashem, what's called B'murgash, and there's Ahavas Hashem, what's called B'li Murgash. There's loving Hashem and you don't feel it, and there's loving Hashem and you do feel it. What's the difference? Adam Rishon before he ate from the Eitzadas Tevara was Ahavas Hashem B'li Murgash, Bilti Murgash. And Adam Rishon and Chava after they ate the Eitzadas Tevara was Ahavas Hashem B'murgash. Right? In other words, you could love the Eibishter and not even see that you love the Eibishter. Why? Because you're so busy with the Eibishter, you're not even aware of your own love. Another person loves the Eibishter, but he's very aware of his own love. Right? I mentioned to you before the Manas Trashela. So there's another story with the Manas Trashela, and I always remember this story being with the Isaac Hogler. And somebody pointed out that in the Rebbe's Yeshimas it says Rab Zalman Zesman, but I may be wrong. But one of the great Chassidim, the Manas Trashela became a Rebbe when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic. And he was the Middle Rebbe's competition. And the Middle Rebbe was very not happy. The Middle Rebbe was very not happy. There was makbid. Because the Middle Rebbe felt that he's the only Mamala Mokum. And the Baras Rashala had such a koyach HaMoshe, a lot of Chassidim went to Strashala. A lot of Chassidim left Lubavitch and went to Strashala. Anyway, So Reb Zalman Zezman, again, if I'm correct, if Zalman Zezman went to see him, he would have koyach. If you looked at the Badas Rashela Bechitzonius, he looked much more similar to the Alter Rebbe. Why? Because the Alter Rebbe used to show his spoilers. The Alter Rebbe used to roll on the floor. The Alter Rebbe used to found his fist into the wall. They had to pad the wall. He shouldn't hurt himself. And the middle of the Rebbe was ice, didn't show any Chitzonius. The Badas Rashela was in the image of the Alter Rebbe Bechitzonius. The greatest Shturim, you know. And people were drawn to this like metal is drawn to magnets. So Reb Zalman Zezman, if I'm not mistaken, it was Reb Zalman Zezman went to Strashele, or he passed away in the Rovne. So wherever he was, Strashele, to check him out, and he's saying Chassidus. He's sitting at the table, was up Chassidus. I mean, the greatness of Aaron Strashele is really somebody. There was a Yid whose name was Reinin, Sender Reinin. So our Rebbe learning this Chassidus of Strashele in Poland, and he said to the Rebbe, he was the other team. The Rebbe's response was, the Rebbe's response was, das ist sehr tief und Sefer. The Rebbe didn't address the question of friend or foe. Das ist sehr tief und Sefer. The Rebbe was learning about Charles Chassidus. And this sent the rain and said to the Rebbe, Lubavitcher, nicht Lubavitcher, Lubavitcher Eden. Das ist sehr, he didn't address the politics. Das ist sehr tief und Sefer. His greatness in Avodah and Torah, unbelievable. So he starts saying Chassidus. And as the Chassidus goes on, he gets excited, raises his voice. Then he's swinging his hands. And then he gets so excited, he stands up. Steht. Then he gets even more excited, he's standing on the chair. And then he's standing on the table. And Reb Zalman Zezman is watching. And Reb Zalman Zezman sees that he has no idea that he's standing on the table. In other words, he's not here. He's there, as our Chassidus, he's someplace else. The goof is reacting by itself. The goof doesn't, in other words, because of where he is, the goof is not so much under control of the neshama. This is the expression, he's standing at the table. So the Zalman watches. Then the Maimer is finishing, yes, he starts to come down from over there. And towards the end of the Maimer, at a certain point, the Zalman noticed, that the Rabbi noticed that he's standing on the table. And he made a split-second decision, the Maimer is almost finished. I'll stand until the end. At that moment, there was a voice from the back of the room, Arke, krieg op vertischt. Arke, get down. In other words, Coles, man. You were not aware that you were standing on the table. That's good. But now that you noticed, sit down. That's the story. I think it's in the Rebbe's Hashimas. I know it's in the Rebbe's Hashimas. Again, I read the story in other sources. There was a different chassid, and every time I tell the story, one of the women here corrects me. She's not here to hear me accept her correction. But Medachsach at Zalman Zezman. What's the pshat? A person serves Hashem with a lot of regish. So it says in Chassidus, when you have feelings of Eibishter, and they're pronounced, it's because you have a little Ra inside you. And the pronouncement, the passion, is because of the resistance of the Tzaddik Keneged. It's like when you have a speck of dust in an oyster, it makes a pearl. The rash comes from the Milchama. But Tzaddik Sheini Gomer has Ra inside, in the Madrig of Tzaddik. So his avoid is berash. A tzaddik gomer has no ra inside of him. So his ava is quiet. Not it's quiet, it's less passionate. It's more than passion, it's deep, it's dveikus. It's a chayr av nimshach achalecha kamayim. It's called ava b'tanugim. We learned about it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I gave a whole class on this. That a tzaddik gomer, because there's no ra inside of himself, his ava is belirash. So the trademark of a tzaddik gomer is he loves Teiv completely. And he hates Ra betachlis hasin, absolutely. Yeah. But he hates Ra coldly. There's no feeling of hate for Ra. Because there's no Ra inside of him. It's this person. So you cannot hate more than a tzaddik gomer hates Ra. But it's onarash. You know, the dogma that I think of every time I come to this point is how Shmuel killed Agog. Shmuel was a Isha Lakim Kaddish. Shmuel was Getlachkeit. Shmuel was Chokol Kamesha Ka'aram. And he took a sword and he chopped him up into pieces. Shmuel Hanavi killed Agog. Ochein Sor Marababis. Shmuel had no feelings when he did to Agog, because he had no connection to Agog whatsoever. But it's not the pshat that had no connection to Agog. He hated Agog. You couldn't hate more than he hated Agog, but it was b'li regesh, because there was none of that inside of him. And that's really the trademark of a tzaddik. That there's a dveikus. because since there's no Ra inside of him, his Avat Hashem is quiet, and his Sinat Ra is also quiet. I'm going to finish with the Sipur. This is the Sipur Ayadua. The Rebbe told the story. So the Rebbe Rashab was asked about this. The Rebbe Rashab spoke about the Alter Rebbe. I mean, the Rebbe Rashab speaks about the Alter Rebbe. It's unbelievable. He says the Gereser is, and when the Rebbe Rashab talks about the Alter Rebbe, it's Mavel. Wirzburg, the Rebbe Rashab had like a private Fabringen, just a few people. And the Friedrich wrote it down, was fascinating. There's oases in there which are unbelievable. And the Rebbe said, the Alter Rebbe was such a pnimi, so how come there was so much sex on the outside? And he answers, for sure the Alter Rebbe was a pnimi, he was an atzmi, but even der Erste. So he was the first. Because he was the first, it showed itself in the world. My interpretation of those words, without knowing, is that the Rash of the Alter Rebbe was not because of the Alter Rebbe, it was because of the world. That's what the Rebbe Rashab answers. And you could say a different pshat. I mean, I'm not telling you what the Rebbe Rashab meant, but that's what he says. The reason why the Alter Rebbe there was a chitzoniistic demonstration is different than by the Abadas Rashab. By the Abadas Rashab, because it was in him. And by the Alter Rebbe, it was what was going on in the Welt. You understand? But that's the word. The Lashon is the wording is the Rebbe Rashab's. The interpretation is my own. I just want to finish with a story, and then I'll let you go. It's mamish a story that's exactly the Iyun. It's in the Rebbe Siches, and now it's also in the Rebbe Rishimis that they found. The Rishim was written first and printed later, but it's in the Siches also. That Reb Nochem Chernobyl was sitting at a table, and they brought him a glass of tea, and he asked for milk, and they told him that the milk was sitting on the table. And it was sitting on the table, he didn't see it. So he asked for milk. And they told him sitting on the table. And the bottom line is they found out that the milk sitting on the table was treif, it was cholavak. And he didn't see it. It did not exist. So when Reb Nochem was told what happened, he didn't see the treif, but Reb Nochem gesagt, das ist Tag Pshat in the Gemara. Cholov she Yisrael reyehu, cholov shechalov yakum ein Yisrael reyehu. Milk, which is milked by a goy, a yid doesn't see it. Right? The halacha of cholav akum is when a goy milks a cow and a Jew is not standing on the milking, it's called cholav akum. But the Getaich, a goy that was milk cholav, which is cholav akum, a yid can't see it. This is only a tzaddik gomer. A tzaddik sheni gomer has a shaykhis to world and to klipa, so it maybe has a shaykhis to see such things. A tzaddik gomer push it. That's why you have it the hayem yem. The Nochem Chernobyl was shomein begufei miamiras omani heishmerab. That's a madrega of a tzaddik gomer. His guf hagashmi has a chush only on the lakim. Okay, we're going to stop now, and I want to thank you for coming and for listening and for learning.